Today we're going to go over two poems. One is called The Lamb, which is the first one we're going to do, and the other one is called The Tyger. And these are, I guess a good way to put it, these are kind of like parallel poems, but one is from Songs of Innocence and one's from Songs of Experience. These are by William Blake. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to focus in on, the structure of the poem. We're going to focus on the speaker of the poem, the diction, the syntax, and just the complexity of it, because that's going to come into play when we talk about the difference between Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. Okay, so let's look at the structure first. You're going to notice that this poem has two stanzas. So and each stanza is somewhat long, but I want you to notice something. What do you notice here and here? All right, so these are repeated. This is repetition, okay? All right, so you have that repetition of little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? So we're looking at that repetition there. And it's not just repetition, but it's the repetition of questions. So we have the repetition of questions in the first stanza. So we really haven't even read all of the poem. We've just skimmed over it. We've noticed that it's in two stanzas. The first stanza has question marks at the end, and that repeated question or questions at the beginning and the end of the stanza. So I'm going to erase this real quick so that we can talk a little bit more, and I'll probably put some of it back up in just a second. But let's just look at this real quick. Look at stanza 1. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Now, a few things to put that I want you guys to pay attention to. All right. So, thee is you. Okay? Little lamb, who made you? Dost thou? That means do you. So, that might make it a little bit easier. Little lamb, who made you? Do you know who made you? So, here's the thing, is there's a question at the beginning and the end, but it's a little simple. Do you know who made you? And then this part right here, well, it's a little too far. All right, so that part's right there. Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead. Now this means over the meadow. All right, so over the meadow. Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. So, I just want to point out the sing-song rhythm and rhyme that this has. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead. So, rhyme, rhyme. These rhyme. So you have rhyming couplets. Remember, a couplet is two consecutive rhyming lines of poetry. So you have rhyming couplets throughout this. And then we've already talked about, and we put it in red because we've already talked about it, we've already talked about the repetition of the question at the beginning and end of the stanza. All right, so yes, we have, yes, we have the speaker repeats the question, but I also want to point out that it's pretty simple. The question is pretty simple. Do you know who made you? What do you notice about the second stanza? As far as the differences in this right here. Do you notice any questions in the second stanza? No, there's no questions in the second stanza. So if we had the questions in the first stanza, but there are no questions in the second stanza, what would you assume? What can you predict this one will be? You can assume that the second stanza will be the answer. And then the speaker says, little lamb, I'll tell thee. Remember, that means you. So the speaker says, I will tell you. So it's so simple that the speaker asks the question, but it's almost a rhetorical question, like, do you know who made you? Let me tell you who made you. Okay. He is called by thy name. That just means your name. And then, so who is he talking about? He's talking to the lamb, right? Okay. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. All right, so we get that. All right. He is meek and he is mild, so gentle, innocent. He became a little child. A child. Now, this is very explicit of what kind of person the speaker is. So the speaker is a child. He says, I, a child, you're a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. Bless thee. Okay, so I will say this at this point, because we're getting into this with this poetry, is William Blake wrote a lot of religious literature, and a lot of his poems have a lot of religious images and a lot of religious references to it. So let's just talk real quick about some of these points that he says. He says, he is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. So, lamb, the Lamb of God. Have you ever heard someone say, the Lamb of God? So he calls himself a lamb. He is meek, he is mild. He became a little child. So, God came down to earth as a child, Jesus. I, a child, thou, a lamb. We are called by his name. So, I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to put this over here. So, you have Christ, the child, and the lamb. All right, so you have Christ, the child, and the lamb. And I want to do that because this is where we get the creator is Christ, the audience, or the speaker, my bad, is the child. The audience is the lamb. All right, so the child is the speaker. He's the one saying, little lamb, do you know who made you? He's talking to the lamb, which, by the way, this is what we call an apostrophe. I know we've talked about it before. But because the child is talking to the lamb as if the lamb could respond back to him, that's how we get an apostrophe. An apostrophe is when the speaker speaks to something that's not human, as if they could respond back. So we have the apostrophe with the child talking to the lamb and asking the lamb questions. Then he's asking about the creator. He says, the creator is called by your name. He calls himself a lamb. He became a little child. And so I want to point out something that the speaker said here. He said that we are called by his name, and that the creator, the speaker, and the audience, or the creator, the child, the lamb, are all share the same qualities of being meek and mild. All right, so this is a fairly simple poem. A question: who's your creator? Who gave you all of this nice stuff? Your voice and place to eat and your wool. And then the repetitive questions. Now, I want to say something about the repetitive questions. That really helps us, even before we see that he says, I, a child, in the second stanza. Those repetitive questions in the first stanza help us see that the speaker is childlike, which we're going to see a lot of in the Innocents poems. But the speaker's childlike. How many of you know a child, I don't know, maybe 4, and they ask questions over and over and over again. They'll ask the same question. You have to answer the same question over and over again. And so that repetition of that very simple question helps you to see the childlike speaker. All right, so this poem is pretty simple, but what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the poem of the Tyger. And the Tyger is kind of like the sister poem of the Lamb. But the Tyger's from Songs of Experience. So I'm going to erase all of this and we're going to move on to, oh goodness. And then we're going to move on to the Tyger. Okay. Now we're going to read this and we're going to analyze this poem. Now, let me talk a little bit about structure here. We looked at the structure of the Lamb, and we noticed that it was only 2 stanzas with the repetition. And before we actually analyze this, I do want to point out the difference in the structure of these poems. So the Lamb was just 2 stanzas. The Tyger, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stanzas, each with 4 lines. So more stanzas in the Tyger. And I know what you're thinking is, why is Tyger spelled that way? Well, that's just how William Blake spelled it. It probably was a common spelling back in that time. And some people like to point out that Tyger spelled that way kind of represents a tiger's stripes and how they are on the tiger. So, all right, so let's do this. The first thing I want to point out is that look in, and I'm going to circle it. Remember we talked about how you had the question in the first stanza of the Lamb. Notice there's 1, 2, 3 stanzas in the Tyger so far. We haven't even started reading. We're just looking, we're skimming over it. 3 stanzas that we can see there. All right, let's scroll. To the 4, 5, and 6. What do you notice here? So 4, 5, stanza 6. So one difference that you can see, besides the fact that there are 6 stanzas, one thing that you can see just by glancing at it is, whereas the Lamb was a question and then an answer, the Tyger is 6 stanzas, but we never really get that stanza that gives us an answer because the poem ends at a question mark. So right there, you can start to predict the complexity of this poem and the fact that it's not going to be a simple question and answer like we had with the Lamb. Okay. So let's go through and let's start breaking it down stanza by stanza. All right. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? All right, so the first thing that I'm going to point out is imagery here. All right, so you have some imagery here. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forest of the night. What image is he giving us for the tiger? The tiger is like what? The tiger is like fire in the night. Now, what could he be saying about a tiger burning bright like fire. And I know it's not a simile there, but we can, in our mind, see that he's trying to make a connection between the tiger and fire. Well, what do we know about both tigers and fire? Well, you could say they're both beautiful. But they also can both be dangerous, right? So they're both beautiful, but they can both be dangerous. Have you ever sat and watched a bonfire? It's beautiful. A candle is beautiful, but it can also be dangerous if it gets out of control. Same thing with a tiger. If you watch a tiger, it's a very beautiful thing, especially going through the forest in the night. But it can also be very dangerous. All right. So we have that first bit of imagery. Let's look at what this first question is right here. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? Now, think about how this question is different from the one in the lamb. Because the one in the lamb, he just says, do you know who made you? That was so simple. But look at this one. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? So, same question, more complex. Same question, but more complex. And that starts to give you a hint right there of what kind of speaker you have in this poem. We said the poem of the Lamb was a childlike speaker. But you can start to see that the speaker in this poem, just from the types of question, just from the complexity of this question and the imagery that's given, the depth of that imagery, you know that this is not a child. This is someone who has more insight into life and can think on a deeper level. Okay, so we know that he says, what immortal hand or eye? So we know that the speaker is trying to figure out what immortal being could frame the symmetry of a tiger. So this is where I want you to start thinking. In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? So he's starting to question a little bit more about the Creator. We get that the Creator, he knows that the Creator, believes that the Creator is immortal. But then, what is he starting to question? Deeps or skies? And I want you to think about that. All right, so the deeps or skies. So maybe he's saying the deeps could be hell, right? The skies could be heaven. And knowing that William Blake wrote a lot of religious poetry and had a lot of religious images, it kind of helps you. So whenever he's talking about that immortal being who created the tiger, and he talks about the deeps or the skies could be hell, the skies could be heaven. So is your Creator Satan or God? And so we get into the complexity of the question. And, was your Creator in heaven or hell? Was your Creator Satan or God? Was he in the deeps or the skies? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And I want to point out this. This one question. We're starting to look at the diction here, the word choice, dare. Then let's go back to the first stanza. Could, fearful. All right? So we've got words like who could frame you. It's a fearful symmetry. Who would dare to aspire? Who dare to seize the fire? So, and also, let's make that connection here. Fire And we get that from up here, okay? So we're starting to make connections from one stanza to the other. It's starting to come together. All right, so now let's look at stanza 3. We're moving a little quick through that stanza 2. Stanza 3. And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? So still we're looking at the word could. And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? So I need to go back to Boyd, because really what we're focusing on in this stanza here is the diction. All right, so the question here, who could twist the sinews of thy heart and when your heart began to beat? So the Creator was making the tiger, but when his heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? Now, we hear the word dread like, oh, I dread going to Miss Pippin's class. Okay, I hope you don't say that. But I dread getting online and doing work. I dread this, I dread that. But dread here is giving us the question of, was your Creator afraid? When your heart began to beat, was your Creator afraid? And so I'm going to put that question over here. Was your Creator afraid? And we've probably all kind of done something like this where, you know, you're really trying to pursue something. You really want something to happen. But then whenever you see that it's starting to come to fruition and it's starting to happen, like, are you afraid of what's happening? And so that's the question here that the speaker is asking is, you know, you formed this tiger, you formed his heart, but when his heart began to beat, were you afraid? And really it's saying, was he afraid? But you get the point. All right, so I'm going to take this off here. And we're going to scroll down and we're going to look at the second half of this poem. All right, so I like this next part here. Looking at stanza 4. What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dead grasp, darest deadly terrors clasp? I'm going to underline a few details in this stanza. And as I underline them, I want you to see if you can understand the figurative, the metaphor here of what the speaker is comparing the Creator of the tiger to what kind of person. So he says, what the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp, dares deadly terrors clasp. Okay, so I've underlined some words, some details here. What's the metaphor? What comparison is the speaker giving to the Creator of the tiger? All right, uses a hammer and a chain and a furnace and an anvil. If you know anything of it, then maybe you couldn't think of the word blacksmith, but so a blacksmith is someone who would heat up metal in a furnace, in an oven. And he would heat it up, and then they grasp it with the clasp. They'll grasp it, and they pull it out, and they put it over the anvil. And the anvil is just a big block. And what they would do is they would use the chain, and they would use the grasp, and they would move that metal and hammer it into whatever form they wanted. So you have the metaphor, the comparison of the Creator of the tiger being a blacksmith. Okay, so let's go on to stanza 5. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? All right, so this part right here, this is an allusion And it's just an allusion to when Satan fell from heaven, when the stars threw down their spears, when Satan was cast out of heaven. That's that illusion. But what I really want to focus in on, because we just read the poem of the Lamb, is, did he who made the Lamb make thee? And so the question here really is not just did the same Creator make you, but I am going to just put same Creator with a few question marks, because the question is not, hey, do you have the same Creator? The question is really, did someone who could make something as gentle and innocent as a lamb also make something as fearful and dangerous as a tiger? So the question isn't just like, hey, do you have the same Creator? It's, could you have the same Creator? All right. Now, I've scrolled down, and you can't see the first stanza, but I'm going to go back up to the first stanza, and I'm going to read it again, and then I want to scroll back down to the last stanza. All right, so let's go up to the first stanza again. Okay. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? All right, now let's look at the last stanza. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? So what I want to point out about this last stanza is it's the same as the first, besides one word, which is dare. Dare frame thy fearful symmetry. So the speaker goes through, he never really gets an answer. He just has a lot of questions about what kind of Creator it was, who the Creator is. But there is one change in his question. It changes from who could or would frame your fearful symmetry to who would dare to do it, because the speaker realizes the danger. So we see a big difference in the lamb and the tiger. So we saw our big differences between the lamb and the tiger, and one of the big differences that we noticed right off the bat is the structure. The lamb had only, let me go to it, the lamb had only 2 stanzas. Now the stanzas are a little longer, but remember you have that repetition, so there's not really more content there. But you only had 2 stanzas in the lamb, whereas in the tiger, we had 6 stanzas. Let's go back to the lamb. Remember in the lamb, we had the question in the first stanza, the answer in the second stanza, because it was a simple question and a simple answer. And it was that childlike faith of, I don't even have to think about who your Creator is. I know who your Creator is. Whereas in the tiger, the question comes into, who could do that? Were they afraid? Was it Satan? Was it God? Who is your Creator? And then getting into some more depth of the question at the end, who would dare to do it? And noticing that we never get an answer. The question is just always, who could do it? Who would dare to do it? And there's no answer. All right? And then just the complexity of the words that are used, the complexity difference between the lamb just being like, oh, who is your Creator? I'll tell you who it is, to what immortal hand or eye could frame that fearful symmetry. You just have this major difference in the complexity of the words and the complexity of thought of who the Creator is. And so you have these sister poems from Innocence and Experience, but they're very different, and you can see the big difference in the speakers of these poems.